I think it was Keith Johnston the other day who made, I think, the clever quip, nobody really wants UPS on their cell phone. They just want to know where their damn package is. I think there's an important point there about the tendency for marketers to overestimate the love with which that people are supposed to have for their brands. Only your board members and stockholders do. Eric Weisberg the other day, I think, made an important point about the limitations of the banner and whether the banner really is the appropriate ad unit for this platform. So understanding ad receptiveness, ad responsiveness across platforms, I think, is going to be critical as mobile is sort of making everyone rethink a lot of the principles that were driving the web for 15 years. To help us on our way to understanding the ways in which ad receptivity, ad effectiveness, ad responsiveness is working across platforms, we have Joline McGoldrick, who is the VP and Research Director at Dynamic Logic. You have been doing what we used to call all the time the dynamic logics, so the dynamic logic studies, the
Yes.
brand studies. You have been doing those pretty much since their inception, haven't you?
Since their inception. We've taken down a lot of your websites, probably in about 2001 or so, but we've learned along the way from the beginning of pop-up ads. Yes.
That's a lot of brand lift. Please welcome Joline.
Absolutely. Great. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I might move around the stage because I've got a light there that I'm working with, and I want to make sure I can see you all for this. But what I hope to do this morning is wrap up a lot of what we've talked about and put it into some conclusions for you and some fundamentals for you, so you can take away some things that are very actionable in terms of how you navigate the mobile space. And what I'm going to talk about today is the concepts of courtesy and connection. And some of the conclusions that I'll draw, they may seem intuitive to you, and that's great, because as researchers, we're interested in two things. We're interested in surprise, and we have some surprises in here. We're also interested in conclusion and being able to put some data and numbers behind that conclusion so that when you need to make a business case for things that you should be doing or what the implications of those things are, you will have numbers to back up that business case. And that's what I hope to do for you all this morning. To do that, I'll be presenting the AdRaction work that we completed this year. And I'll get into that in a moment, but I wanted to give you a mental model for thinking about connection and courtesy. And to do that, I'm going to tell you about some research that was done unrelated to advertising and unrelated to online. It was about robots, actually. About 2007, so about 6 years ago, researchers were interested in understanding whether people could treat robots like humans and what the implications of that were. So they did a simple study, which I'll just show you right here, with this guy right here. That's iCat the robot. And what they were looking to see was, would iCat the robot's personality change how people interacted with it? They had them do a simple interaction, and there were varying degrees of helpfulness and intelligence in iCat the robot. And then at the end of the experiment, the researchers said, we'd like you to shut off the robot. Well, we have to warn you that when you shut off this robot, you're going to erase all of its personality, all of its memory, all of its behavior. So shutting this robot off is essentially akin to killing the robot. And what they found was that when the robot was helpful and when the robot was intelligent, the subjects hesitated. And they delayed 3 times as much how long it took them to shut off that robot than when the robot was unhelpful or unintelligent. So that phenomena applies directly to what we do as marketers. The unintelligent, unhelpful, discourteous advertising, just like the robot, is quickly shut off. So our challenge as marketers, and what I hope to show you this morning, is some tips for being the helpful, courteous, relevant advertising so that when your audiences are confronted with that marketing, they pause for a moment and perhaps they connect to it. So let me get into the research. There are 3 components of the research. There's 2 quantitative components and there's 1 qualitative component. The first quantitative component, what we're interested in doing is indexing all formats against one another. So here we're looking at mobile, but we're also looking at things like TV and magazines to see how they stack up against each other. And then because we do the study every 2 years, we're looking at how these things change over time. From there, we did a deep dive specifically into mobile among smartphone and tablet users. And here we're interested in their attitudes towards formats, all different types of formats, but also what are the drivers of those attitudes. And then finally, we did one additional deep dive using qualitative research where we looked just at audiences who were favorable towards mobile. And what we're interested in here are specific examples of when mobile succeeds and when mobile fails and what that means for the consumer. And it's going to be some very interesting stuff. So where are we right now? Not good, right? We're down at the bottom there, just at par with non-opt-in emails. 9% favorability among general audiences. Contrast that with 28% favorability for opt-in emails. So even when you're looking at digital formats, mobile is low for digital formats. And then draw the starker contrast there between TV. So if you look at the top, TV's got 49% favorability, right? 41% for magazines, but 9% for mobile. Incrementally, when we look at, and this has been mentioned before in the previous panel, when we look at smartphones and tablets, we'll see that for some formats, like brand posts and social news feeds, it's incrementally better news. And again, what you'll see here, so the blue bar is going to be how those formats work on smartphones, and the green bar is how those formats work on tablets. So to the point earlier that there's some receptivity in tablets, the research bears that out, that across all ad formats, tablets, the advertising content is perceived slightly more favorably than it is in smartphones. There's also a massive, and this has been alluded to earlier, but here's some data behind it, opportunity for growth in terms of the ad spend. So right now, about 11.7% of time spent is on mobile, but you'll see it's only 1% of the spend. And while that number is expected to grow 5 times in the next 3 years, I would posit to you that we have a lot of work to do internally before we're ready for that. So the challenge, what's the challenge for us? Well, when we were doing the qualitative research over and over again, when we heard people describe their mobile devices, they did so in human and superhuman-like terms, that their devices were multi-talented, that they gave them more freedom, that they were superhuman. Right? There was this great love expressed for mobile devices. So our challenge as marketers is how do we translate that love for the device to a love for the marketing content on that device. And what we'd posit to you is it's the idea of courteous connection. And what I mean by courteous connection is understanding the screen, which I think we've touched on, and I'll provide some more data to back up. And very importantly, understanding the audience and understanding the expectations of the audience so that we can meet them and get that number up from 9% to somewhere more palatable. And what you'll see is that mobile, when done right, has a huge payoff. So if you look at the green bar there and then you look at the red bar, that is the chasm between the best third of mobile campaigns and the worst third of mobile campaigns in terms of increasing your marketing effectiveness metrics. So for the best mobile campaigns, there's a 26% increase in message association. For the worst, there's no change, right? If you look at brand favorability and purchase intent, the best increased them by 14 and 17% respectively, but the worst actually decreased them, right? So a huge payoff when mobile marketing is done correctly, and a huge either waste of money or perhaps damage to your brand when it's not. So let's talk about understanding the screen first. So here's just some numbers to put behind this idea that we're not looking at mobile monolithically anymore. Clearly, it's 2 different devices, and we have to be careful and be mindful of what content we're sending to each device. So if you look at the time share there, the time share for the smartphone, it's really an everything device. There's almost equal shares of talking, texting, apps consumed, game playing. Whereas if you look at the tablet device, it's really an edutainment device. It's for consuming content. And that's important because what that suggests is the mindset is different. So when you're on a smartphone and confronted with advertising, that advertising is seen more as a disruption because the time on smartphones is very goal-directed. Whereas when you're on a tablet, there's more openness there, and the numbers will bear that out. The second point, and this is extraordinarily important, is audiences. So we expected differences by age and gender, that younger audiences, male versus female, that there'd be differences there, and there were. But what surprised us was that we found, when we started getting into numbers, that there was something more subtle going on. There was something more than just demographics that was driving either receptivity or the lack of receptivity. So we ran a cluster analysis, and what we found was that 3 dominant clusters emerged. And we've named them, and I want to describe them a little bit, because as you'll see, this is the difference in terms of audiences. This is the difference in terms of the perception of advertising. And I present this slide like this because I think it's important for publishers, for those of you who are publishers in the audience, to be curious enough about your audiences that you know not just their demos, but their specifics of their behavior, what they like, what they don't like, how they use their devices, especially as we get into multi-screen. We almost need to be sociologists in terms of how we understand our audiences. And for advertisers, it's the same thing. When you are working with your publishers, it's asking them, how do your audiences use this media? And being more curious about that. And so what we find is that 3 types emerge. The first type we call mobile sophisticates. Demographically, they're slightly younger and they're slightly more male. But psychographically, we really see them as the future of the mobile web. These are audiences who their mobile device is almost becoming a substitute for their PC. But most importantly, for purposes of marketing, they're really wowed by their devices, and there is an openness to be wowed by the marketing content that is on those devices, and they are very receptive to mobile marketing. The next group we call mobile effectives. Demographically, it skews slightly more female, but the real key difference with this group is they see their devices as a tool. So when they are on their smartphone or their tablet, they're goal-oriented. And when they receive advertising or marketing, it's an interruption. And what they're looking for marketers is a tangible quid pro quo. And we'll talk more about this exchange as we move on. And then finally, there's the group mobile pragmatists. This is a group demographically, they're across the board, even shares, even by age and gender. But for them, they see advertising as the necessary cost of free content. So providing that advertising is relevant and a value add, they're open to it. And if we want to look at just how important these typologies are, so the blue bar there, that's your mobile sophisticates. And if you look at the difference, you'll see that mobile sophisticates are 3 times more favorable towards advertising than those two other clusters. In some formats, like in-app ads and social news feeds, they're almost at 50% favorability, right? So there's clearly an openness among this group. If you look at age next, younger audiences, again, are more favorable, but those do not compare. Look at the difference between younger audiences, the most favorable, with the psychographics, right? This is psychographics, not just demographics, that are leading the way in the differences here. And then if we look at gender, we see more flexibility among male audiences than among female audiences. And I want to pause on this one for a second, because this has gotten a bunch of press, and I want to clarify what we think is going on here. So overall, male audiences are slightly more receptive than female audiences. And what we think is going on is that the concepts of rudeness and intrusion that we'll talk about in social competence, those are more present for female audiences. So female audiences voice more frustration for things like interstitial ads that they can't close or resize that are blocking their way, being asked for too much information when they want an app. Those social competence factors matter a lot more for female audiences, whereas men are a little bit more forgiving about that, and we'll talk more about that. So most importantly, the most important thing is the expectations that the audiences have about mobile. So some of these expectations are intuitive, but they also suggest that these things are not happening. And some of these are surprising. So mobile will be competent. We can all agree that mobile should be competent. But what we found over and over again in the quantitative and the qualitative research was a frustration on the part of audiences because sometimes it was not working right. And when it didn't work right, that imputed negatively, not just on that brand, but on the format overall, right? So we have to rise the bar overall to give better, because overall increases favorability for mobile. The second, and this was more surprising to us, was this idea that mobile will know who I am and target accordingly. This is interesting because in the study, right, we're looking at the mobile audience, and this is not just people who work in mobile advertising, right? This is anyone. And what we found was across the board, there was an assumption of built-in intelligence. One woman said it as, I know that information is being collected about me everywhere I am in the mobile web, everywhere that I've been on the mobile web, everything that I do on the mobile web, and I know that marketers have access to all of this information. So why are they sending me the wrong content, right? So we have to meet their expectation of built-in intelligence, and the data suggests that we're not yet doing that. And then the final thing is mobile will offer me a tangible exchange. We'll talk more about this too. And when I say tangible exchange, I want to clarify up front that I don't just mean coupons or discounts. What we found is that there is a value spectrum, right? Which is the idea that you will give me something in exchange for my time, my eyes, my bandwidth, my battery. Move on to the next slide. So these concepts boil down to connection and courtesy. By connection, we mean awareness of the virtual space, where you are on the mobile web, and awareness of the physical space, where you are navigating in the world, where your location. And then the idea of courtesy. Courtesy being competence, technical competence and social competence, and exchange. So connection, where you are in the virtual space. I want to start off here by telling you of how this can work exactly the right way. So in the qualitative component, we asked respondents to give us some examples of a good experience they had on the mobile web with an advertiser. And one of the ones that we thought was most profound was from one of our qual subjects, Andrew. What he said is he was browsing a watch blog. He was served a display ad, right? So that's like the stepson of ads, right? Everyone's got negative things to say about display ads. But he served a display ad for Divas Watch. It was in the right virtual space. It was compelling enough, it was clean enough, it was uncluttered enough that he paused and he went to research more about Divas Watch. In that same interaction, he ended up purchasing the Divas Watch. And what that shows us as marketers is that when we target correctly in the virtual space, we can essentially collapse the purchase funnel. That's one interaction. It goes from serving a display ad to purchasing the ad, which, as we all know, is purchasing the product, which is a marketer's dream. Okay, tailoring where we are in the physical space. So there is both a receptivity to sharing location and a desire for more location-based information. So this is broken down again by the psychographic group. So you see mobile sophisticates, again, who we see as the future of the mobile web. Almost 45% of them are willing to share their location-based information to get the right services and the right content. And then we see that close to 30% of all of those groups are also willing to share it, right? So there's willingness to share it, and then there's a desire to get that right information. And this applies to display ads, this applies to mobile websites, and this applies to apps. In all three of these instances, people don't want to have to tell you that, yes, I'm in the US, yes, I'm in Florida. They want you as the marketer to know that about them and let them skip those steps. And one example of where we think this is done really well is the Home Depot app. So the Home Depot app uses some location-based services, and then when you're actually in the store, that essentially unlocks a whole new set of things that you can do because you're in the store. Getting product information, scanning for UPC codes, right? It changes the functionality based on where you are. And this is the future of where apps need to move, to get your location-based information, to serve you the right content, and to perhaps offer you more based on those things. Courtesy. Courtesy starts with competence. And what we mean by competence, and this is, I think, really the key here. It's the key here because it's something that we must do, and it's the key here because it is not currently being done, and it has huge implications for the people we're trying to serve, which are the brands. And what we see is that there's really two types of competence that are emerging: technical competence and social competence. So if you look at technical incompetence, things like slow or incompatible apps, flash content that doesn't work, sending links that break, right? That's about 20 to 40% of the audience say, if you look at that, is that damages their opinion of the brand who is giving them that content, right? So it's not just that it's having no effect, it's having a negative effect. But perhaps worse than technical incompetence is social incompetence. If you look at social incompetence, things like requesting too much personal information, sending unwanted posts, not providing a way to opt out of ads, between 40 and almost 50% of respondents are saying that this damages their opinion of the brand. What this suggests is that we all need to hold ourselves to a higher standard and make sure not just that things are executed correctly, but we're being mindful of how we relate to audiences on the mobile web. And an example of this done right was, that users mentioned, was the Subaru ad. And what I think the Subaru ad does is it combines a bunch of things. It works properly, it's quick, it's clean, it's easy to load, and the designers of it have forecasted why you're most likely to be there, which is to get information about the price of a car. So rather than making you navigate through several screens, delaying the amount of time and naturally losing you, it makes it cleaner and quicker so that within 2 clicks you can get the information that you need. And finally, the last concept I want to talk about is exchange. So as I mentioned before, there is an exchange continuum that stretches from tangible exchange, which is things like deals and coupons, all the way down to, if you look at the 25% mark, location-based info, right? It's this idea that rather than telling me something about you, the brand, instead, you're offering me something in exchange for my eyes, my bandwidth, my battery. And when this is done right, it shifts how users perceive advertising. So again, this is an example of a display ad. It's for Pillsbury, and it was basically a display ad about getting recipes. And what I think is so interesting about this, it was not just that so many qualitative respondents mentioned this display ad, but it was what they said about it. So if we look at what Sharon says, she says, the smaller ad drew me in with their recipes, but key to this, they are giving me something. They're not trying to sell me something. And this is one of the keys to successful engagement in the mobile web. It's the idea of shifting the focus from the marketer to the user. If you're coming into this intimate space, shift the focus to be successful. So some best practices for how we can more effectively leverage display ads, apps, and mobile websites. With display ads, what we should not do is just show a product shot and make users guess what brand it's for. This happens a lot, which is why I'm mentioning it. We should not just repurpose the creative that we have for print and online and try to resize it or crop it or click here to learn more, keeping those buttons in. This is happening, and it doesn't work. And we should not use highly intrusive formats unless we've got some value add to offer. And this is particularly true with women. If you are targeting to a female audience and you are going to have some ad that disrupts their user experience, you better make sure that you're offering them some value add. And what instead you need is clearly branding the creative, a call to action, tight targeting, and making the ads interactive and engaging. For a mobile website, the key here is not to outdo your online website. It's to have the same thing, or maybe even slightly less, that works quickly, that minimizes taps, and that acknowledges that users are goal-directed in this space. So it's better to have competent than it is to have entertaining. It needs to be fast, it needs to be clean, information needs to be at the top of the screen where people can easily access it, and we need to minimize the number of taps. And finally, what makes a good app? The key is really, it shouldn't crash, right? Technical things. It shouldn't crash. You should not build one if there's no reason that someone needs to use it. So the predicate question is, why would this person use my app? Why should they use my app instead of my mobile website? And I'd posit to you that as marketers, unless you can come up with a compelling answer for that, perhaps you're better off really working on the fundamentals of your mobile website, getting that right before you delve into creating an app that's essentially just a copy of it. And finally, don't ask for more information than you need. Intrusion, as we see, negatively damages people's opinion of the brand. So if the app is a place where you're just collecting content about who's using the app, I think it's best done perhaps somewhere else. You need to offer users something in return, and then once you have all those fundamentals, you can get to surprising and delighting your audiences. And when we do these things correctly, when we can be courteous, when we can be relevant, when we can be helpful, I think what it does is rather than there being a rush to shut off your experience with mobile content and mobile marketing, perhaps we can pause for a second, perhaps users can pause for a second, and they can actually connect with the brand.
Thank you, Joline. Any questions of Joline? I wanted to ask about the so-called native ad formats and how they fit into this, and if you've seen any result.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Native ad formats.
Can you give me some examples of what you mean specifically?
Some would argue that all Facebook ads are native, but also BuzzFeed.
Right.
And the idea of making ads that seem more integrated in terms of content and both in placement within the content.
Right, so those ad formats tend to outperform other mobile types because, again, the key to what you mentioned here is the relevance to the browsing experience, right? They're more in sync, fitting in with what the user is doing. We see the flip side of that. What doesn't work well is the user is navigating somewhere, whether that could be on their social feed, whether that could be on a news page, and something unexpected happens. Because what's different, I think, about something like TV, and even something like online, right? If you look at that spectrum, TV, online, and mobile, there's no regularity with which people are confronted with marketing, right? With TV, we're almost socialized at this point that we know that after a certain period of time, there'll be a break and we get advertising. We're expecting it more with PC, but with mobile, it's completely irregular. The mobile space is in a regular space, and so every time that people are confronted with marketing, even if it's something as subtle as a native or a brand post, it still comes as a surprise. It's still unexpected because that expectation hasn't been built in. The standardization is not necessarily there. So that's, again, the idea of tailoring to the virtual space, to making sure that ad experience is going to be consonant with what the user is already doing.
Joline, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Ted, come on up.